Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today I'm joined by Gabe Saglie. Gabe, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by maybe asking you to introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about what you do, because every time I check in on you, you're somewhere else on the planet. So over to you, Gabe.
I like to stay on the move, Simon, is how I stay out of trouble. But listen, it's a pleasure to connect with you and spend a part of my day. I'm out here in Los Angeles in beautiful Southern California. But I know your neck of the woods, Dublin, Ireland, well. I get to travel there a couple of times a year, and it's in many ways, it feels a bit like maybe a second home just because I've forged some wonderful friendships there over the years. I am a sort of long-time travel contributor, mainly to a variety of different broadcast outlets across the USA. My background is in broadcast journalism. I earned a master's in broadcast journalism from the University of Southern California. Worked in news in the news scene in San Diego, in Santa Barbara, which is a small town about an hour and a half north of LA, and stumbled onto the position of weatherman, which I did for 5 years. I was the morning weather guy in Santa Barbara at the ABC station there. Wonderful ad-lib training ground. And then I stumbled onto the world of travel and the travel space, and I joined Travelzoo, a website that was founded in the USA, but now we have a global reach with offices across Europe, across Canada as well, and across the US, 13 plus million members worldwide. But I stumbled onto the Travelzoo world about 18 and a half years ago. I'm one of the longer employed folks at the company now, happy to say. And as such, in the last 15 plus years, I've kind of forged sort of a travel contributor personality, if you will, and work with producers and reporters and anchors and editors at broadcast outlets across the U.S., from New York to L.A. and everything in between. So it forces me to keep tabs on the news of the day around the world of travel. It also keeps me on the road. So much of what I sort of speak to is based on firsthand experience. And of course, a lot of it is conversations with people like you and other people in the space who are always on the move, exploring different parts of the world, meeting new people, and trying to share some of the wonder that comes with that with the rest of the world, if they're willing to listen, ideally.
Well, thank you, Gabe, for that. It's fascinating, the weatherman duration. And as you say, being able to ad lib on camera live, it's a great training ground, I'm sure. And then Travelzoo, yeah, I've been a keen supporter and an observer of Travelzoo and its global expansion. It certainly has reached around the world quite literally, and a huge success. But I wanted to ask you a little bit, because every time I turn on the TV, I see Gabe interviewing somebody, or I look online and you're in some morning TV studio being interviewed by somebody else. I even we were talking before we came on air that, I even tuned into the St. Patrick's Day parade in Dublin, Ireland, and you were there, microphone in hand, in front of the cameras in the bright green suit, looking very dapper. So it is fascinating. But before we get into some of the other aspects I want to ask you about, just want to touch on travel from your vantage point, because you have a very unique vantage point. You're plugged into the world of travel. And I suppose I'm coming at it from a post-pandemic perspective, because travel literally ground to a halt for most people. Yeah. And yet, in my sort of wearing my business hat, we seem to be attending more conferences than ever. There seems to be more in-person events than ever. And it seems to be back stronger than ever. Is that just my perception, or, what's your vantage point from where you sit, Gabe?
I am on the same page, Simon. I think that it's almost impossible to discuss travel today, whether most of my mind share is in the US, but certainly globally, it's almost impossible to discuss the way that it's evolving and growing without the COVID reference. I mean, at the end of the day, COVID did serve as, whether we liked it or not, a reset in the way that the travel industry works, and perhaps most importantly, the way that we as consumers travel, period. So yes, I mean, there's been a clear bounce back. I think a couple of things. I mean, we realized, maybe not at the time, but as we began to emerge from the pandemic, we realized, hey, this freedom to go whenever and wherever and however we want can, as unfathomable as it was before March of 2020, can in fact be ripped away from us from one day to the next. I mean, we saw it happen. So as fictional as it seemed before that March 2020 period, I mean, that was our reality, and we were forced, and depending on where you lived in the world, to stay relegated to a very small radius within where we lived. Our contact with other people was limited, and we realized that this is a freedom that when we have it, we should really savor and treasure it as much as we can. So I think that now, as a community of travelers, no matter where we live, we're now trying to lean into that a bit more thoughtfully, and it just inevitably has become a priority for many of us in a way that it hasn't before. You look at the stats. Certainly here in the U.S., we've seen that. I work with a variety of different destinations. I was in Puerto Rico in the Caribbean just a couple of weeks ago. It's a U.S. territory. It's one of those places where Americans don't need a passport. If they want a Caribbean getaway, they can go to Puerto Rico without a passport. So pretty easy. Their numbers for 2023 are, as far as visitor numbers, 37% bigger than 2019 pre-pandemic. I was talking to the folks at Princess Cruise Lines around the Alaska cruise program. They set a record last year, 1.7 million people doing an Alaskan cruise, beating the previous record of 2019 for 1.3 million. So, even looking at sort of the pre-pandemic reality, clearly in very short order, the post-pandemic travel numbers are very robust. So they speak to this appetite that we have to kind of get out there. Even if we're visiting places that we're familiar with, we've been to before, we are looking to uncover new things in those places, new people. Maybe we're staying at these places a little bit longer, and we are just more keen on gobbling up. Here in the States, we usually get 10 vacation days a year, right? So we're very keen on maximizing that and perhaps folding travel into our work lives as much as we possibly can. So I think you're right. I agree. The appetite is there. It is robust. It continues to grow. And I think that if we try to look at these silver linings from the pandemic, as terrible as it was, this would be one of them. Our greater appreciation for the world around us and our ability to tap those places of near and far is with freedom that we, I think, treasure now more than ever.
No, I think it's great. It's a great insight. It's great to get your view on that, Gabe. And yeah, I mean, everywhere I look, it seems to be booming when it comes to events, when it comes to international travel, when it comes to vacations. People seem to be quite hungry to get away, to invest in travel and hospitality. And a lot of the firms in that sector, I'm sure there are some that are still, maybe struggling, but the vast majority of places where I cast a spotlight, their business is growing very much so, and particularly some of the numbers that you shared there. I mean, that's huge growth. The thing as well, I suppose, and maybe you can talk to this for a second, is the nature of the way we work today. You sort of mentioned there, didn't you, that people are maybe traveling more for work, but maybe tagging on a few days of vacation or staying maybe a little bit longer somewhere. So it's kind of like a work vacation kind of thing going on, and also working from anywhere. We have seen maybe a growth in sort of, I know that people use the term digital nomads, but people that would literally work in a country for a certain period of time and then maybe move somewhere else. And that all features into the travel ecosystem, doesn't it?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I think that what we're seeing now is this. I think it's a challenge for companies these days to expect, in many cases, their employees to come into the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That sort of standard that existed pre-pandemic clearly is no longer there. So now companies, if we can get employees in 2 to 3 days a week, but still expecting to be productive on the days where they're not physically in an office. So I think it was a bit of a jarring reality check a year or two ago. I think we've progressed. I think companies now that employ hundreds or thousands of people have multiple offices. The calling card for many large companies and corporations, in some ways, pre-pandemic, were their offices, how high up on floor in the buildings they were, the kind of views you got from those offices, the location, and in this or that part of Manhattan or downtown LA or downtown Dallas, et cetera, that physical real estate perhaps has less value and wow factor than it once did. Now we're starting to understand that mobility and agility and being able to have your employees perform their duties, whether they are in a physical office or their home office, or perhaps poolside at some beautiful resort there in Donegal in Ireland, is something that we should accept as a reality. I think employees are proving that they can be productive even if they're not physically sitting behind a desk Monday through Friday. So I think there's a phrase they use in the States quite readily now called bleisure, this kind of blending between business and leisure travel. Personally, when I, pre-pandemic, I was doing a lot of traveling already. So I'd find myself going to different cities and inevitably trying to add a day in, get in maybe a day early before the duties were scheduled to begin, or perhaps extend the stay a night or two later for the sake of just making it easy, just physically on that individual that's kind of on the go and kind of hitting one airport after the other. But really, at the end of the day, was about fostering some of those new relationships and friendships that you were starting to develop at these places, or the ability to just be able to be on your own by yourself without being back in that, as wonderful as it is, that sort of daily routine of, I've got 3 kids. I love it, but it's nice to have maybe that extra day when I'm on the road to not necessarily be on that 9 to 5 agenda and do a little bit of, maybe I'll pick up that book that I've been meaning to read that is simply tougher to do when you're, trying to run the kids around school and hitting dental appointments, et cetera. So, yeah, I think that productivity now extends beyond the dependable 9 to 5 kind of network that we knew before COVID. And it's, I'm always encouraging people to consider the fact that, hey, you can do that if you are, even if you do spend the night out of town. Connectivity now is such that we can get these things done. We can have these virtual meetings. The virtual reality, I think, affects travel, and especially, I think, corporate and business travel to some degree, in that we're a little bit more finicky or just conscientious of whether it's the impact that our travel has, from a climate or ecological standpoint, and just from a fiscal standpoint, does it make sense to have this many meetings face to face, or do we get a little bit more creative as to maybe minimizing the amount of time that we visit face to face, but make those moments perhaps last a little bit longer, fold in more extracurricular activities to these meetings, et cetera, and therefore sort of streamline but also enhance these meetings that we have with each other. So that's, I think, still a reality in motion, where we want to maximize our ability to look at each other, from across the globe on a computer screen or a phone screen, but perhaps better produce the moments that we have together physically to maximize those moments as well. So I think that's still in flux. We're still kind of working around this, but this technology is a beautiful thing, and allowed many of us to survive what we do through the pandemic. And now it's one of those cogs in the wheel of our day-to-day reality, for sure.
No, absolutely. And as you were talking there, I was reminded that only at the time of recording, Dublin City has recently launched a portal live in the city centre, connected with, it's literally outside the Flatiron building in New York, and it's live streaming people who can basically see each other in 2 parts of the world, and there's something quite unique about travel and meeting people virtually, but then there's that sort of certain magic when you meet in person, right?
Yeah.
And that there's something that happens there. But I don't want to run out of time, Gabe, and I want to add in maybe a conversation around the content production side of your world, because we've touched a little bit on the travel side, and I know you've got deep expertise and knowledge on the travel side, but you're also spending an awful lot of time either in a TV studio, in front of a camera, holding a microphone, talking to producers and people that put content together. What does that side of your world look like? Because it must take up a lot of time behind the scenes. We only see the the shiny stuff in front of the camera, but you must be very much engaged in that area of work.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, my background in broadcast journalism, I do love that field. I wasn't necessarily always looking to necessarily parlay that into travel. But the way that TV works here in the United States, if you want to be in the news world, you're kind of climbing from a smaller market to a larger market, and the New Yorks and the LAs and the San Franciscos and the Bostons, those are the creme de la creme, right? Those are our top 5, 10 markets out of about 250 that exist across the U.S. So that was my track. I stumbled into the world of travel. I was lucky enough that I grew up. I was born in Norway to Chilean parents. Grew up as a kid in Chile. My parents were not necessarily globetrotters, but on the move quite a bit, whether within Chile itself or across different parts of South America. And then we moved to Southern California when I was 8, originally just for a year, but eventually things changed, and this Southern California is now home. But I grew up with this appreciation for kind of moving around, going to new places. And I think that when I was able to tap that as a professional, it really kind of struck a chord, and I do love it. So the work that goes into what I do, sometimes it is tedious, sometimes it is at odd hours. I'm waking up at times when my wife says, "Why are you getting up in the middle of the night?" But if your brain's working, you got to get things done. That's just kind of what you do. But if you love it, ideally, then it's a sort of a self-feeding prophecy. So a lot of what I do is I work directly with these TV stations across the country. So if I'm working with my friends at the station Pix 11 in New York, it's a topic that is relevant to the New York audience, whether it's road trips from Manhattan. Here's where you can go for spring break, or European destinations that are particularly affordable this particular time of year out of New York City. So it's a very curated, market-specific focus with each of these segments. It's a bit of a different scene if I'm talking to my friends at KTLA in LA, where we're thinking more Hawaii, maybe Mexico, maybe national parks, etc. So a very sort of one-on-one communication and going back and forth with these producers and anchors and reporters. And the lead up can be several days. A lot of it is gathering information. A lot of it is gathering video, especially when you're talking TV, video that's either in-house from a destination that you are promoting, or oftentimes I'm doing more and more of these, Simon, these on location broadcasts, which I'm finding are seeing increased appetite, because I think there's an authenticity that comes with speaking about Ireland's celebration around St. Patrick's Day. And if you can be on the parade route versus in a studio describing what you saw last year, but if you can take people physically, sort of in live and in real time, there is an authenticity. There's an excitement. There's a buzz that does translate quite well. So, for all this talk about traditional broadcast media, being hit from all sides by the social, wave that is inevitable, there is still quite a massive captive audience and a beautiful ability to deliver in real time what a destination is all about. So I mentioned Puerto Rico. I was physically on a Puerto Rico beach talking to specific television markets about the perks of traveling without a passport, some of the big events coming up in Puerto Rico over the summer, etc. And there's something just really neat about doing it physically and on location. Another tip of the hat to the fact that technology does allow us to do that now in a much more low frills way. The cost, sort of the threshold to entry to be able to do that is diminished. We're seeing a lot of these content producers in the world leverage that quite nicely. And I think the traditional broadcast is not necessarily suffering, but it's just, it's all about expanding your horizons and folding the social channels and platforms into broadcast. Doesn't live in a silo anymore. It is connected to being able to extend the reach of your content to an audience that might be only, say, on LinkedIn or on Instagram. The tone is always a bit different. That's a work in and of itself. I'm speaking to my LinkedIn audience a little bit differently than Instagram and Facebook and broadcast TV. It's a bit of a each one is its own sort of work in progress. But when they come together, it can be a beautiful thing, and it speaks to the sort of the power to reach that many more people across different avenues, but delivering that same message that travel is accessible, attainable, and worth folding into your everyday life.
I really like that, Gabe, because you've touched on some really important things there. And whether it's the TV station and the geography that goes out to, or whether it is the social media platforms, there is something about tailoring the content for that particular audience type. And then, of course, the traditional TV, which a lot of the live stuff goes out on, or maybe a pre-packaged recorded piece that goes out broadcast live. A lot of the channels now, they repurpose that, so it ends up in social circles anyway, and it helps pull people back to the traditional programming and the traditional channel. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, Gabe. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, and I'm almost hesitant to ask you this question because every time, as I said at the start, every time I see you, you're somewhere else on the planet and doing something with some camera pointing at you. But how do you go about planning your world? Because what does the next 6, 12, 18 months look like? What's on your horizon? What's on your roadmap? How do you actually do that? Because I'm assuming there's an awful lot of moving parts and a lot of travel behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean that is part of the fun, is trying to figure out how to schedule everything and balance everything as things go. I'm lucky that I work with a variety of different destinations, and they are on their own schedule. So I know, for example, with Tourism Ireland, for example, and I'm sure we both know some of the fine folks who work at Tourism Ireland. Clearly, every St. Patrick's Day, that's a project that's on the horizon. In the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot of stories around the origins of Halloween in Ireland. So that means that October, I've got to look at the possibility that I get to, fortunately, head back to Ireland. With Puerto Rico, it was important that we did the story in April because it was about promoting some brand new events that were including the first ever Puerto Rican Day Parade on Puerto Rico itself, happening over the summer. So we wanted to get that message out in April so that folks got inspired and perhaps started to plan accordingly. So working with destinations almost forces you to kind of drive your own schedule based on what their needs might be. At least the way that the Americans travel is very seasonally driven. We have a lot of time in the summer. We have very limited time in the spring and fall, except for maybe a week here or there. And of course, the holidays are the crowning jewel in many people's schedules. Oftentimes, it's the only time of the year they can do a 1 or 2 week vacation, at least here in the States, right? So seasonally, that also dictates what we do. You're talking to an audience that is going to be, in the fall, really focused on, give me information I can use for my holiday vacation planning. I've got to go to this destination, or perhaps I'm open to going anywhere. Where should I go when everybody else is traveling home for the holidays? And so, yeah, so it's really driven by the calendar, by what the consumer is alert to that time of year, and the destination's own needs, special events, etc. And when you start to fill in the calendar that way, you start to realize that there's something going on pretty much all the time. My priority is keeping my audience in mind. It is that sort of avid or perhaps intrigued American consumer who's simply willing to invest in travel and therefore is hungry for information, for new destinations, for tips and trends that they can sort of fold into their everyday life. So that's my priority. And then I'm lucky enough to work with just enough sort of a mosaic of destinations and travel brands where I can editorially sort of liaise the two and hopefully give some visibility to some of these destinations I love and give some practical, user-friendly, tangible advice and insights to my fellow traveling consumers.
Well, Gabe, you do that with style, my friend. So continued success.
Thank you, Simon.
Finally,
Appreciate
Gabe,
that.
I want
Yes,
to
sir.
ask you, is there anything else that you'd like to maybe share with our audience, something you'd like to leave us with, to ponder and to think about? And secondly, and importantly, if people want to find out more, connect, find out, what's happening in your world, where's the best place to point them to?
Okay, thank you for that. First off, I'd say, without sounding too lofty, I know some wonderful folks in Hawaii, including Maui, which is, dealt with these fires in Lahaina in August of last year, and they're still trying to rebound from that disaster. But I always have this conversation with my Hawaiian travel friends. There's a word they use called malama, which is Hawaiian for being mindful, being careful, being thoughtful and respectful. It's a message they try to really put out there for travelers to Hawaii. When you come out here, try to minimize your impact. Try to leave the place that you're visiting, ideally the same as, or if possible, better than the way you found it. But this idea, I think, certainly qualifies for Hawaii as this sort of isolated destination in the middle of the Pacific. But I think it's applicable, I find, across the globe, no matter where you're going. I'm visiting Simon in Dublin. I'm going to take this concept with me. I'm traveling up the coast to San Francisco. I'm taking this. Just this idea, as we continue, as we spoke about, to tap into this robust appetite to travel. I think it's worth just keeping in mind that we want to leave. We want to be just a bit more mindful of our fellow human beings on the other side of that trip. And just, it doesn't take much, little tangible ways to just make sure that our impact is a positive one, no matter where we go, I think is a message worth repeating. So thanks for letting me do that here. As far as keeping tabs with me, which I love to do with folks out there, check out the Travelzoo website, travelzoo.com here in the US, but we're also in Canada, and we've got outfits across the UK, Germany, France, and Spain. You can follow me personally. My handle is Gabe Saglie, at Gabe Saglie, Saglie, and you'll find me on LinkedIn, and you'll find me, Twitter and or X and Instagram and Facebook. And then I've got my website, which is GabeTheTravelGuy.com, and I update that with some of my TV clips and some of my insights and stories. I do some wine and food writing on the side, as you might know. That's always fun to share with folks as well.
We encourage everybody to go and check out all those great locations and try and keep tabs on where Gabe is, but offering some great content. And look, that brings us really nicely, Gabe, to the end of today's show. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode, wherever they are on the planet. I want to ask people to like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. Of course, check out all the links that Gabe has mentioned. And I hope that you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Gabe. But thank you, Gabe. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today, my friend. Continued success.
It's been my treat, Simon. Thank you so much.